for a wide range of public and private organizations. These include UN, the European Commission, Barcelona, Seoul City Hall, global corporations, as well as small, medium-sized enterprises. He's worked in over 40 countries worldwide, is clearly a global citizen, created a master in sustainable business and innovation at EADA, a pioneering international program attracting young professionals from 5 continents. He is co-led with Jordi, who's also here with us, the first ever developmental evaluation in a UN agency, the UNFPA, and his areas of research include conscious entrepreneurship, systems thinking, Zen business evaluation, and sustainable innovation. We're going to get a chance to hear from Joseph, and then we'll have a discussion, reaction from Jordi and myself, and then we'll open it up for you. And as we go along, you're welcome to enter questions into the chat. We'll have time to discuss and interact from your perspectives. I want to begin with a passage from the opening of the book in which Joseph writes, "System science does not take into consideration the subjective experience of the observer for healing and transforming the system. As part of the system, the degree of perception and level of consciousness of the person who observes, studies, tries to understand and act upon the system has a direct influence to transform it for the better or the worse. Reality, and therefore systems, is a function of how we perceive and see the world. It is directly conditioned about our expectations, fears, and motivations. The assumptions and mental models we hold about the world influence this reality. I think," he said, "that the study and above all the application of systems thinking require the recognition and integration of the observer, the agent, into the process of knowing." Part of the integration here and the connection with Blue Marble evaluation is the Blue Marble evaluation begins with the overarching principle of global thinking and very much incorporates the importance of each of us locating ourselves in a global context, the connection between the local and the global, and the what we've called the skin in the game principle, which is that we all have a stake, a position in the systems that we are a part of, and that our participation in those systems is not putting us outside as evaluators, but making us part of the intervention itself. And so I very much resonate to Joseph seeing and describing the observer and the agent within a systems context, his emphasis throughout the book on this being a way of thinking and that how we think matters about all that we do. So Joseph, let me invite you to join us and tell us about Taoist and Buddhist thinking and your experiences with it, and what you're offering by way of helping us understand our world and our roles in it.
All right, thank you so much, Michael, for the kind invitation, and also for to Charmaine, who kindly helped a lot in organizing this webinar. Also, I'd like to thank Jordi Dalbas, and my colleague, friend, and partner, to join us here. So thank you very much. It's such an honor. And let me also to provide some background before I go into the main ideas of the book, because we actually were working with Jordi in actually facilitating that first developmental evaluation at the UN system, and we had the pleasure to meet physically. Michael, I say physically because of course we already met his ideas earlier, and it was a time we could, not only work on this, and we of course got so much inspiration from him, but also we had time, even if not long time, but enough to connect in a very deep way. So thank you for that. And it was actually Jordi and I had the privilege actually to read the Blue Marble evaluation book before it was published. So this is an indicator of that level of connection. And one of the first things, I was already working, of course, on my book and Buddhist and Taoist systems thinking, which is a book that is actually an outcome of also years of experience and also a part of my life, which I devoted in East Asia, in that case in Seoul, in South Korea, where I had, the impulse, a calling, to go over the practice of Zen, which is the symbiosis between Buddhism and Taoism, and combining it with what I was doing as a consultant in that part of the world. So I saw and you have, let me allow if I can share a presentation that I just prepared for today, where you can see, I think the visuals.
Joseph, that you're coming to us from Barcelona.
Yes, from Barcelona. Yes, exactly. I'm based in Barcelona. And here, can you see it? I will put it in a full screen mode. So you can see here the blue marble evaluation, the logo, which is this blue marble, and there's the yin and yang, which is actually one of the main principles of Taoism, which is also a principle in the blue marble evaluation. And it departs the book also from the principle number 2 in the blue marble evaluation, which is the Anthropocene as a context. So we very much acknowledge those negative consequences of such an extractive economic system, that really very much conditions the way we live, we organize, and the way we manage our own organizations and our own actions. And so that sets the scene in a nutshell. And I would like to start by acknowledging these meaningful connections. So you have here the Anthropocene, as I mentioned, and the book starts with the idea that somehow the system brought us to a great disconnection between humans and nature. And this is, standing at the very root of most of the wicked problems we are experiencing today, and also in an era in which the degrees of complexity are so high and so big, and that is very difficult for us, to find, clear pathways of action. And this is actually that some of the people, most of you that work in systems transformation at the organizational level in any domain, we are used to think about solutions in a more linear thinking, and it requires this systems thinking in order at least to understand the complex, and then to try to simplify that reality so that we can see clearly the next ways forward. So that would be the first point of connection with the blue marble evaluation. And I'd like to talk a little bit about why I wrote this book. So we have here, that's a quote that I learned from watching a documentary in Netflix. It's about Johan Brockstrom, who is actually one of the scientists behind the planetary boundaries. And this is a quote that really stuck me, and he said, "I don't get depressed, I get angry. There's a real reason to be frustrated, because science is clear. We have been communicating it for the past 30 years, and still we are not moving into the right direction." So this is actually the feeling I had when before writing the book. It was one of the main motivations that brought me also to write the book. It's because, yes, we know we have the science, but what is hampering ourselves in order not to move forward, to really connect, and heal the human nature relationship. So that's one of the main I would say highlights of that documentary that I wanted to share with you. And that made me think a lot about what Michael mentioned. We all have a stick in the game, but the way science has been conducted for the most part of its history, although now we have, scientific streams like second order science that is trying to bridge this, but and more indeed in the management realm, we still see our objects as separate from ourselves, and we try to look at a specific reality, an objective reality. And one of the main understandings of Buddhism and Taoism is that, does a reality exist? And the answer is that the conventional reality is subjective. And for connecting with the ultimate reality, we need a process of liberation, from that world of samsara, which is the way that Buddhists have for illustrating the daily cycle of birth and death, which brings a lot of suffering or dissatisfaction in our lives, which is at the very core, the very root of this disconnection between humans and nature, where we actually are nature, not only part of nature, but our nature. So we all come with the mental models, values, belief systems, purposes that we have, implicit or explicitly, and we try to see and observe and see patterns, especially evaluators, when we try to understand and try to capture, and evaluate the objects we are commissioned. So the problem is when we do not recognize or we are not even aware. That's the first step for not recognizing our mental models and values and beliefs. And this is one of the processes that even Buddhism and Taoism, in different ways, they share in common. The fact that first we have to undertake an inner journey in order to deep questioning ourselves, and ask our fundamental questions in life. So what is our purpose? Why do we do the things we do? Why we are here? What characterizes humans as a species? And so those are fundamental questions in this way, so that we can start to see our relationships between what we see and ourselves in a different way, in a very interconnected way. So the fact that the observer has been mostly neglected for the most part in most of scientific paradigms we have seen, and not only this, but also in the ways we manage and run organizations and do our job. So it's standing as one underlying structure of this fundamental problem. So here we like, well, at least me, I use even to write a lot that I'm an independent evaluator. But if we are participators, when we have this, as we, since the very moment we start trying to understand a system, we are also influencing that system, which is one of the main outcomes of the thousands of years from Taoist observation and research. So we are, rather than independent evaluators, we are interdependent evaluators. And so we are a key participator in the process of transformation. So this is the consciousness gap, the first gap that the book tries to address. And the second, it's a sub-gap, which is a East-West knowledge gap. So, and I think this is important because most of, and I'm scoping, this reflection around the management realm, in which most theories, methods, frameworks are grounded on Western ideas and methodologies and approaches. And for example, who hasn't heard, anyone who studied management or business about the Porter's 5 forces, about Clayton Christensen's disruptive innovation, about the business model canvas. Most of these theories are grounded on Western thinking. And we are ignoring a wealth of knowledge, which is coming in that case from the East, but that would apply to any indigenous philosophy that is very much rooted on universal principles. And we still haven't included all this wealth of knowledge that is rooted in the interconnections and in healing the human and nature disconnect, which could be very much helpful for evaluating, and not only evaluating, but for in general designing any intervention or program for systems transformation. And why Buddhist and Taoist system thinking? Well, of course, that's been my journey. And this is something that I learned by myself. And I tried also then, of course, as a scientist to have this scholarly perspective. But the book is not intended to be, it is not actually a scholarly treatise about Buddhism or Taoism, but it's more like an interpretation of those systemic thinking for being applicable and facilitate sustainable transformation. So that's the domain of this book, and I thought it would be important for me at least to let you know. So what Buddhist and Taoist system thinking have in common is that they share some fundamental universal principles. So it's rooted in some universal principles. Buddhism and Taoism, they really like each other. It was when Bodhidharma from India came and arrived to China, and he started disseminating and spreading the Mahayana Buddhism philosophy in China, and he found Taoist people, the Taoist philosophy, and they really like each other because they were speaking about some fundamental principles. And here you have some of them. The main one is oneness. It's oneness, which already includes implicitly the concept of interdependence, which now we can also see entered in some management lexicon. And the principle of oneness is how we depart any knowledge, any process of cognition we may have from this fundamental experience and feeling that that we are part of the same, that we come from the same origin, and that human nature is a universal nature. So the experience of oneness really tries, to make ourselves aware of that own nature. The Buddhists and Taoists, they call it the ultimate reality, or the Tao. And the practice of oneness involves also the practice of the development of some values like compassion and loving kindness, which is has also scientific benefits now, and there's enough evidence to see the benefits of practicing compassion and bringing it to our workplace and our programs. We also have the principle of emptiness, which is it's like a key, it's like a gateway to arrive to grasp the experience of oneness, of interdependence. And emptiness means, and that's for, well, at least to me as an evaluator, was very helpful because it means suspending judgment for a while, so that you can put your state of mind, your mindset in a very calm state where you are detaching yourself from your ego, and you allow yourself a space, an inner space where you can grasp and feel the oneness, the concept of interdependence. And this is a principle which, for example, the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, he called interbeing. No, so we are empty of a separate self. So we only interbe. So we are not. We inter-are. So, and from that point, we can grasp new interconnections and relationships. And this is very applicable to when we try to understand how systems work. So systems thinking. Thinking is the process of organizing, getting information, organizing information. So it is helpful for us to make decisions. So systems thinking is about doing that process, but in a way that allows us to know or try to understand how the world works, which is not an easy thing. And then we have also principles like impermanence, and this is, well, impermanence is now we all know the importance of this principle, because after COVID, we could no longer hold plants. So impermanence has turned into a key thing that we already experienced through COVID. No, but impermanence is the attitude in which the two polarities of anything, of any phenomenon, can be expressed, and here it comes. The yin and yang theory. So, for example, if I'm rich now, but I know that I can be poor, and so on. And then we have the Wu Wei principle, which is, well, it's very difficult to translate it, but it's like some people translate it as the principle of non-action. But it is actually more related to the principle of doing nothing against the natural path of things. So it is a principle that really allows us to follow more our intuition, to get the process of cognition based on that intuition, and to apply that intuition when we don't have enough evidence, or when sometimes we have evidence, but even we have contradictory evidence, which is the case in a lot of programs and projects we are evaluating. So you have here, like the Taoists, they have a beautiful metaphor to explain actually the process of knowing, and they consider human being as a small universe, so that we already contain the whole information that is present in the universe inside ourselves. So it is a small universe standing between earth and heaven that learns based on three sources of knowledge. And the first one is the one which is derived from the practice of these fundamental universal principles, oneness, emptiness, and impermanence, which are associated, are manifestations of the practice of the Tao, in which the first one is connecting to this absolute knowledge, as they call it, which is universal. You can access it from any identity, but in the end, when you touch with that, and we can find different indigenous philosophies that call it other names, but they refer to the same experience. The connection and the practice with these three principles it helps us evaluators to understand those systems. And here, this blue marble worldview that is beautifully described in the blue marble evaluation book. Then we also have that is the root of the intuitive knowledge that is called also the tacit knowledge, that is the root of the rational knowledge or explicit knowledge. And when we practice this intuitive knowledge, which requires a lot of emotional intelligence, this is really helpful for designing evaluation, in which we have to engage a lot of stakeholders. We have to see and recognize the patterns that define the system, also the relationships that characterize the system, and the boundaries that may limit the functioning of the system, as well as the multiple perspectives that are involved. And also it's very useful to design inquiry frameworks that are based in that deep level of knowledge. And it's based on that later we can apply those sources of knowledge to conduct evaluations in the way we design and decide which methods we use, how we collect data, how we analyze, visualize, and interpret that data, and also on how we make sense of that data in the particular context in which we are trying to transform the system or influence the system, and also in the series of feedback loops that allow enough learning and sense making in a collective way. So that could be a feedback loop of different sources of knowledge that interplay actually in the process of cognition. And well, here you have like, my book is not entirely about evaluation. There's a specific chapter on evaluation. And in that chapter, I described actually a competency framework for an evaluative mindset. And it's actually a direct application of those principles I've just described to the process of evaluation. And here you have some examples on how to apply oneness and interbeing, how this competency translates into a behavior that can guide the behavior of ourselves as evaluators, in the conduction of our job. So I will not go deep into that, but it's a competencies framework designed based on the principles of oneness, interbeing, emptiness, impermanence, wu wei, and the yin yang, and the 5 elements, and the Zen business model, which are 2 methodologies that I also introduced in the book. And well, here you have the main 2 methodologies or theories. Well, they are theories. I turned them into methodologies, but they are fundamentally theories. One is the yin and yang, that one you have in your left. And the other one is the 5 elements, or the 5 phases, which is called in English. So in the book, I say that Tao is where the earliest systems thinkers, and it was funny because in a conversation with a colleague of mine last week in a podcast interview said, well, but there are also other people long time ago, that already had also this connection with oneness, with the fundamental origin of the universe, and they are right. I mean, all indigenous cultures are rooted in this kind of thinking. They express it in different ways, of course, but I say they are the earliest because they are the ones that developed, or at least that we know they developed, because that transcended time, that they develop a specific theories, explicit theories that are useful to understand how the functioning of the universe work. And the yin and yang is one of them. The yin and yang is useful. I explain in the book that we can, the yin and yang is basically an explanation, a way to describe any phenomenon in 2 different manifestations that they look actually opposed, even contradictory, but that they help each other. They are complementary to each other. It's like I said, poor and rich. It's like local and global, which is also one of the principles in the Marvel evaluation. Tall and short, hot and cold, and for example, in business, profitability and sustainability. So it allows us to illuminate the opposite of a concept, and by doing this, it may inspire us in finding a vision or something we would like to inquire about. And this is very useful in designing evaluations. And the other one is the 5 phases, which is also one of the main theories. And at the end of my introduction, I will just briefly mention introduce the Zen business model. So here are some tools, methodologies, which are an interpretation of a Buddhist and Taoist system thinkings and brought into the domain of systems transformation. One of them, for example, is the T-Qualia model. T-Qualia stands for Tao-Qualia, and it refers to the Tao direct experience. And it's a model It's a model for inspiring the process of cognition that is rooted actually in the direct experience of our own consciousness. So T-Qualia practices can be, you can access T-Qualia through meditation, through yoga, through mindfulness, through Tai Chi, through Qigong, through a lot of experiences that are based, and the approach of the East in accessing the core consciousness is actually very much different from the West, because it's a way we can work on our minds from the no mind. So we put the attention on our bodies and on the breathing in order that to grasp this state of calmness when new experiences and feelings and our capacity of perception expands, so we can feel and sense it. That once we have practiced those experiences, then we go and turn into a next phase, which is the pause and reflect, which is on how we can activate and expand our intellectual understanding of what we just felt. So it's a nature-based behavioral repatterning and decision-making. And that leads to the concept of reflective consciousness. Here we think and reflect about what we sense, what we experience. The third phase is how we systematize and design which outcomes we make out of this reflection. So here we make a formal interpretation and we make a creative sense making of what happened to us. And here we activate and expand our creativity, and normally we do it in a collective way. The next phase is whether our outputs work and are understood for the society, for our communities. So here is the social and market embodiment, which requires an action-based experimentation. And out of here is when we try things, we do prototypes, we test them, and we see whether it's accepted socially through the market mechanism. And finally, the last phase, the fifth phase, is the systems learning. It is an empirical-based evolution of what just happened. We try to also get the feedback from the market, and that allows us to make sense of what just happened, so we can activate and expand life-enhancing features. So we can then later scale it up if that worked, or if not, we can also fine-tune it. So we may integrate it, and that's the moment when we can say, yes, now we got it and we know it. So that could be, in a nutshell, how this process of cognition may work in systems learning. And you have here a feedback loop, combining with the theories of loop learning about Argyris, how these phases, for example, the phase with systematization and design and social market embodiment are directly related to the single loop learning, in which we can sense the tensions of the system, we can design transformative actions, we have expected results, and then we learn about that system, which is the phase, the fifth phase. And we ask questions like, what did we learn? Have actions changed the current behavior? Why, how, to whom? So here we go deep into the underlying structures of the system, the mental models of the people that influence the system. And finally, in the next, the triple loop learning, this is directly related to the first and second phases of T-Qualia and the core consciousness and pause and reflect and reflective consciousness, which is deep questioning. It's about, are we actually doing the right things? Or how do we know what is right? What does the system need? That deep listening, so that we can repurpose what we are doing, and we can actually help and influence positively the system in which we are part. And finally, I like to share. Well, that was an experiment I did with a colleague of mine. We met in a workshop in actually practicing some of these methodologies in systems transformation. And so I depicted the Gaia organization, which is an organization that is based on Gaian principles. So it's a living system. It's it also works on, it's self-regulated. So there's the principle of autopoiesis works fully in that kind of organization, which is opposed to the organization as a machine that has very much conditioned our mental models until today. And then it has three overarching principles of lifefulness on how the organization, the purpose of this organization is actually enforcing, creating new forms of life or enhancing the actual ones. On awareness, on being aware that as humans, we also have social and cultural and human systems that may condition and even be contrary to do that. And on the biologic, which is following nature as a mentor and role model, in any action we undertake in our organization. So this is talking about an organizational point of view. And here you have, I depicted this to a colleague of mine who is an artist, and he beautifully portrayed the Gaia organization in this painting. And I put it here today in this presentation because I think that we need arts in what we do, because arts really allow us to emotionally connect with what we do. And sometimes, we know, for the busyness of our life, we just focus on how effective and efficient we are. And we miss this emotional connection, which to me, at least, I think is very key. And when you go to Buddhist philosophies and Taoist philosophies, you see art is always fundamental for connecting us emotionally with why we do the things we do. And finally, here is the Zen business model, which is at the root of the Gaia organization, which biomimics the cycles of transformations we find in nature per the 5 elements, and human leadership is the area in the organization that analogically corresponds to the fire element, which generates earth. Here we have stakeholders, the stakeholders star, which is based on the collaboration. Then that leads to the metal element, which is marketing and innovation, which is related to the principle of agility. And metal nurtures water. Water actually is related to the full profit star, which is the abundance. And here is how, as an organization, we are able to generate and especially sustain value. And finally, the water nurtures wood. And wood is related to the brand impact recognition star, which is related to the impact we generate and we create. So those could be, in a nutshell, the 5 principles and elements of the Zen business model. And this is a model that may work for making a diagnosis of how an organization is contributing to systems transformation. And also it could be also as a framework to evaluate principles, which also is also one of the synergy that the Buddhist and Taoist system thinking shares with the remarkable evaluation, which is principles focused. And well, finally, I would also remind you that just my publisher sent me an email today that there's 30% of discount with the book. You have here the code for those interested in you. And there's this website where you can, access the website, find some reviews, and access the contents of the different chapters. So for your own information. And I will stop here because I'd like to give the floor to my colleague, Jordi Del Vasco, who really helped me in reviewing the book. And he's actually a source of learning for me, because as colleagues and partners, we share a lot of battles, a lot of journeys, and just, working and being with him is a source of learning. And in a way, this learning is also reflected in the book. So Jordi, thank you for being here with us, and it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Actually, yes, I was lucky enough and privileged enough to share part of the journey with Joseph. But my contribution here, I think that I would like to center, to focus these 5 next minutes in sharing a bit with you how, because this book is full of knowledge, right? And knowledge at different levels. And I would like to go around the question on, if you're an evaluator, if you are evaluating, how could this book be useful to you? Because actually, this is what I've been going through in the process of, I was working with Josep Maria while he was writing the book, and plenty of the principles that he's just mentioned and he's put forward, he was practicing them as he was writing the book, learning from them, and then putting them in the book. And I was lucky enough to also practice them myself. So I think that what could be interesting here is to say, okay, there is a broad, high-level pitch from the book in terms of universal knowledge, but there is also a pretty down-to-earth approach to the book, which is like there is practical learning that could be applied tomorrow, right away, if you're doing an evaluation. And that's why I would like to focus on. Just as a bit of a frame, of a context, I've been working on evaluation over the last 20 years, and I come from the classical linear type of evaluation, 5 DAC criteria, everything linear, boxes and arrows type of paradigm, right? So I've been learning on new methodologies and on how to evaluate as I've gone through through my career. So I started with the log frame, and I got stuck in the European Union with the log frame for a long time, then to realize that was not enough. to help me as a tool to evaluate particular realities or fix evaluation matrices and stuff like that. And then, you start going through better evaluation website that is present in this webinar, trying to look for new methods and tools. And then you learn about the theory of change, and then systems thinking comes in. So what I'm trying to tell you is that I do not come from the environmental science where systems thinking is one of the first topics that they look at. I come from the other end, from the linear boxes and narrow type of logical models. And I have to tell you that I really found a lot of practical help in the book when it comes to evaluate, and how Jordi, as an evaluator, faces an evaluation. And I wanted to share a bit. Joseph has already gone through the main principles, through like oneness, emptiness, impermanence, wu wei, yin and yang. But I would like to tell you how those principles, or trying to apply those principles. I'm not a master of any kind. I make a lot of mistakes, but at least what I want to share with you is the fact that I've tried somehow to get inspired and apply those principles while I was evaluating, and a little bit what I got from it. So Joseph mentioned like oneness, the principle of oneness and interbeing. And I remember like when I read the script and talking with Josep Maria, what I got is that principle that we are all interconnected, as well as compassion and being appreciative. And this, when you're facing an evaluation, where you're collecting data, when you're putting questions forward, the part that the fact that you are aware that we are all interconnected, that those entities and organizations that you're evaluating are all interconnected, and the fact that that leads you to be appreciative on your assessments and on your questions, that helps a lot when it comes to that interconnection between what we've call in evaluation the evaluant, or that is being evaluated, and the evaluator. We're not separate entities, we are connected. And the fact that you're conscious about that, at least it helped me quite a lot. Another one is emptiness. The way I have interpreted, and Josep Maria, you correct if I'm wrong, but the way that I interpreted emptiness while evaluating is to approach evaluators from the beginner's mind. You see, away from conditioning, listening to every interview, listening to every exposition of facts with a fresh mind, and trying to be a bit like a kid, asking questions like a kid would do. That's so emptying up yourself from the previous conditioning and be there in front of the inquiry from an absolute empty but fresh mind, looking at that particular case. When it comes to impermanence, I think that impermanence have a lot to do with the fact that we would like to control the situation. We would like to control. We have expectations when we do evaluations. We have gathered data from here, from there. We have hypotheses and preliminary findings arising and coming up. And at least in my case, I do have expectations of those. I hope that those findings will be validated as I go through the process. So then I have my beautiful conclusion that I can trace back at the end. And impermanence is teaching me, as I practice evaluation, to relax my mind, to open my mind, to let go of that sense of control that I would like to, because that letting go of that sense of control ends up helping you avoid asking lead questions and biased questions, I think, in some way. So that's the practical part of impermanence. With the wu wei and the do not force, that's the way Josep puts it in the book, do not force events to fit your plans, go with the flow. That's another part. I mean, that has helped me in evaluation as well in my personal life. I can tell you, the wu wei together with the suspended judgment, you things happening, and our brain, at least my brain, and I think that I have a lot of everybody's brain in me, as we're all very similar, you want to position. There is a point when you're evaluating that your brain is boiling and you need to position yourself in a number of hypotheses, preliminary findings, doing sense making. What is happening? I need an explanation right now of what is happening. And I realized that often that pressure to do that came very early, and now at least I can postpone it a little bit more. So I am more comfortable with suspended judgment than I was in the past. And I really have to admit that the book and the way Josep Maria puts it forward helped me a lot to do that. And then there is the yin and yang. I already knew the yin and yang a little bit because I had the privilege of working in China for 5 years, a couple of decades ago. But this application of the yin and yang principle, these managing paradoxes, that has helped me a lot in designing and then dealing with evaluation, because yin and yang is about seemingly contradictory things that complement each other. And I'm sure that you would share with me that humans, we are all made of contradictions. And even organizations are made of contradictions. They want contradictory, seemingly contradictory things at the same time, but for a common purpose. And as an evaluator, I really had problem to deal with. How do you deal with that? How you represent that? How can you make sense of that? And the fact these complementary and forces that try to harmonize seemingly contradictory elements, that helped me quite a lot. And a way of, in practical terms, working with that is a term that is also used in developmental evaluation quite a lot, taken from systems thinking, which is the tensions, yeah? Working with tensions. The fact that you can say, well, in this organization, on this particular evaluation, there is a number of tensions, and then put them in a map and explain those tensions. That's a yin and yang way of explaining, making sense of what might be happening in an evaluation. So that would be the first comment. And the second comment that I would like to share with you that the book has helped me a lot with is that as we move on towards what Josep calls the new paradigm, these organizations that work for transformation, that work for a positive impact in the world, organizations more and more play a key role in that transformation. So transformation has a lot to do not only with programs and projects and particular interventions, but on organizations and the impact that they have onto the world and onto the people that is working in them. So the level, what I understood from the book is that organizations have also a conscious, they're conscious, they have a level of consciousness, of awareness, yeah? And, but then if we have to evaluate, or at least try to understand how organizations contribute to transformation, how do you do this? Because with the classical criteria that you have from evaluation handbooks, that doesn't work. It's a completely different thing. How do you approach the contribution? And that now I'm quoting now Josep. He said the contribution of organizations to transformation. How do you do that? How you capture that? And then we have a number of frames. They are thinking frameworks that then maybe we could keep on working on and then turn into methodologies that give us those mental frames that help us address those type of questions. How does an organization contribute to transformation? I mean, Joseph just presented the T-Qualia model. So when it comes to learning from transformation, are we as an organization learning for transformation and contributing to it from a point of view of learning? So the T-Qualia is a model that could help us frame an evaluation in that regard, or also the Zen business model, the last one that he presented, yeah, that can also help us how organizations evolve, how they increase the level of consciousness, then to contribute for a better future, and how they harmonize themselves. I mean, all these are models that take us beyond the effectiveness, efficiency, relevance type of criteria when we evaluate, and they incorporate other, or they have a flavor of other criteria like harmony, for example, that could be criteria that with these models that Joseph is introducing, we could at some point try to evaluate as grasping transformation. Yeah. So here I'm talking about evaluation as a deep understanding of what is happening, how and why. And I think that altogether the book, to me, it's been a very helpful tool to understand what matters of what is happening. Yeah. Usually when we evaluate, it's about evaluating things that we thought in the past would happen in the future, but most of what happens in a complex context happens as we go. And the book has a lot of models and tools that I think could help us in understanding what really matters. I mean, when we are evaluating in a context of uncertainty and in a context of complexity. Of course, if you are evaluating in a very stable context where everything can be foreseen, you do not need to go into all these methods. There are already linear methods that are absolutely useful. But if the context is not that simple, I think that the book offers a wide range of tools and possibilities in this regard. Joseph mentioned this box with he calls it the competency framework for an evaluative mindset. That is table 9.1 in chapter 9. If you don't have much time, or you're still not, you're an evaluator and you're not much convinced about the book, that would be it would be my entry point. That table really tells us how all this can mean something to you right away in a couple of weeks if you start getting familiarized with all these methods and concepts. That's my contribution, Joseph. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Jordi. Wonderful. I was taking notes as crazy because that all helps me a lot in learning a lot of the application of this in your case, no? Which you've been practicing evaluation for a long time, and you know the esteem I have for you, and you're a world-class evaluator. So thank you so much. And Michael, we would like also to know your thoughts about this. If you have some more reflections. So the floor is yours, Michael.
Well, thank you. Thank you both, Joseph, for the book and for your presentation. And there are some responses to the presentation in chat, including a couple of invitations to Joseph to present. So if you have a venue where you would like to have Joseph present about the book, he's put his email in the chat. You can contact him and see if you can arrange a presentation for your own part of the world about these important issues. A couple things that I would do to place this in the context of our times and its important contribution, and then do feel free to put questions or comments in the chat. Last week was the United Nations Food System Summit in New York, the result of a year of work building towards dealing with transforming food systems. And the Blue Marble Network played a role in that. And we'll be having a webinar on that, where there were some 900 dialogues held in the last year around the world, where people at any venue and any perspective could address their experience of food and food systems and their thoughts about its transformation. And what struck me most about that as the summit emerged, and we've wrote a report about what we found in this, was the switch to thinking about food systems. And we're seeing this in a number of arenas, which makes Joseph's book especially timely. This is a major transition worldwide. Throughout the Green Revolution, the issue of hunger in the world and the effort to industrialize agriculture, increase yields with new varieties, with fertilizers, with pesticides and herbicides, the focus was on food and agriculture, but pretty much as a closed system, doing whatever it could take to grow more food. The emphasis was on increased production, increased efficiency, without really attention to the effects of industrial agriculture on human health, on ecological health, on the long-term sustainability issues. And hunger has persisted despite the Green Revolution. David Beasley of the World Food Program introduced the summit by saying, "A child dies of starvation in the world every 5 seconds. Shame on the world." But what the summit helped do, just by asking people to engage with food systems, is change the conversation from growing more food to examining the food systems, the agricultural systems that generate food up and down the value chain, the effects on human health, the effects on the environment, everything from our waste of food, the packaging of food, we all eat. And to take a systems perspective, you can take the principles that Joseph has presented and apply them to food systems. But we're seeing the same thing in other places. We're moving from talking about land and air and water pollution to looking at climate systems, from looking at just the temperature to the COP coming up 26 will be about the climate systems. in the social justice movement. I'm coming to you from Minnesota, where George Floyd was murdered just over a year ago. The social justice uprising around the world from there moved the discussion from racial discrimination, which has been a long time issue in America and in various forms throughout the world, to systemic racism, that racism is a systems issue, not just an individual discrimination issue. And the pandemic has brought to our attention not just the issue of how individual people stay well or get sick, how we treat people, but it's identified the enormous disparities in our health systems, the failure of our health systems around the world, that the response to the pandemic has been a systemic issue. And so regardless of what we're now talking about, the world is coming to see what used to be treated as siloed problems, whether it's pollution or social justice or food or agriculture or climate, treated as isolated autonomous problems with projects, as Jordi described, with logic models and SMART goals to attack them. We're now coming to see across the board that these are systems issues and that those systems are interconnected. That is part of the interconnectedness, that climate and food, agriculture, health, water, land, air are interconnected systems. So that for all of us, being able to have systems frameworks to deal with and the kind of systems principles that Joseph is highlighting for us does represent a very different mental model of how things go. And I think part of the yin yang applied to this is that the one part of our mental models has to be systems thinking, but we still end up taking specific action within a local context. We can't take on all of these systems. So everybody, wherever they are, has to figure out how they relate in their own backyard, in your own evaluation, in your own work, to what you can do within your micro system that connects to the macro and global systems. So I'm going to use since Joseph began with the blue marble yin yang symbol, I'm going to reveal something about that we haven't talked about before. So here is the blue marble logo with, as Joseph said, the yin yang green line through it. And I want to invite people to note something additional about this presentation graphically. What does this do? What does it present? What do you see? Take a moment and look at it, because there's an irony here that is purposeful in a yin-yang sense. The logo is a distortion of reality. What we did was take the entire globe and put it on one two-dimensional space, so that the continents have all been brought together on one side of the globe. You see that? So it's not actually showing the entire globe. It's compressing in two-dimensional space all of the continents of the world. And it's in that sense that it evokes both reality and non-reality, the perception of things, how our perceptions are affected. I was also struck, Joseph, with the beautiful art piece of the Gaia organization that you shared, a really, really stunning piece of art. I have long used as many of you know, the jester as a symbol of the evaluator, who in medieval times had the role of trying to get truth to the monarch when monarchs surrounded by themselves by people who just told them what they wanted to hear. And the job of the jester was to speak truth in a way that could be heard, to keep the monarch informed about what was really going on in the kingdom or in the land. And so I commissioned a piece of art for Blue Marble evaluation of the jester with the various perspectives of the globe, and very much agree with you that we need to connect both with our cognitive and intellectual, but our artistic and creative sides of things as we deal with these important issues. So let me see if that brings up anything for you, and then we'll turn to some of the questions and issues. Oh, one other yin yang thing I wanted to mention before I go away, and that is that I find is really quite significant these days and relates to what Jordi was saying about how do we work with people in particular situations. We're talking a great deal in the pandemic and with climate change about how we're all in this together, and that our shared humanity is at stake. At the same time, there's significant pushback against the notion that we're all in this together because of the great disparities in the world, the vaccine inequities being an example, the health disparities, the effects in different parts of the world, the racism and xenophobia in different parts of the world, that people don't feel like we're all in this together. There are major polarizations and divisions in the world. And from a yin-yang point of view, both those things are true at the same time. There are major divisions, major polarizations. We are quite different from each other. We're often very much in conflict, and we're all in this together. Our shared humanity is at stake, and we are all descended from the same group of women in East Africa 200,000 years ago. We have a common lineage. We not only have a common planet, we have a common DNA lineage, but we have major divisions. And so in any given evaluation, from a Blue Marble perspective, we're dealing both with what do we share as a humanity and what are our differences that we have to deal with in order to create a sustainable and just future going forward. I find that the yin yang and the principles that Joseph has highlighted for us very helpful in dealing with that tension. So Joseph, let's give you a chance to respond, and then we'll turn here to our chat questions.
All right, thank you so much, Michael, for all those reflections. I couldn't agree more. You know? So the yin and yang, for, I'd like to well, more than answer, because you share some reflections I took some concepts, and I will illustrate an example of something that I use, in facilitating transformative practices in organizations, which is actually based on the yin and yang. It's the yin and yang creative tensions, which is a concept included in the book. And so sometimes you have like you can draw two very different concepts. You have a whiteboard, you draw it in the whiteboard, or you have a flip chart, and you start to reflect on each of the concepts first individually. So you get a group of people working on one issue, and you just put one of the concepts. The other one you don't show it yet. And so, for example, now let's say the concept of where a lot of business organizations struggle with what is the balance between we should focus first on making profit or on pursuing sustainability as our main purpose and the core of our strategy. So you let a group of people reflect on the concept of profit, and people then can come up with what that means for them and for the organization. And you see also the level of alignment with that. You identify there is some, for example, some tension just in that concept alone. And then you move to the other one, to the other flip chart, where you have sustainability, and you do the same exercise. You allow first people to debate on that. And when you allow some time, maybe 15 minutes each, and then you trace a line between the two, and then you start asking the question, what do you think should be the purpose, which would be the component? So any yin-yang manifestation has a common concept, no, which could be the phenomenon, as Tao is said, or a component. So that in that case, the component would be purpose. No, when we talk about leadership, you can mention that making the analogy between one polarity, it's transactional. So we do things because I'm on a contract, you pay me for doing that, so that's why I have to be accountable for that. Or transformational, which is the other polarity of leadership. No, we do things because we believe in that, we have a purpose, and we have to deliver on our purpose beyond that. No, and we help each other. We are a part of a team. We are part of the system. So we facilitate and coach each other. So you do this kind of things, and then you get the perspective from the two poles, and then you see how by discussing this, you are arriving into a point of consensus. And you just facilitate and you let the system self-regulate. So that would be an example of a practice, a Gaia practice in that case, of how the yin and yang may work and may help to harmonize, because the space of the transformation is actually in between the tensions, the two poles, right? It's in between profitability and sustainability, in between transactional and transformational leadership. So, and well, it's just, I wanted just to share this, no, because it's one of the applications of actually going over all those tensions that sometimes we may find there's no way forward. And probably we won't get yet to a result in the short term, but it's actually a way to understand the system and how we make sense of that system in our organization.
Thank you. That's tremendous. A number of people are sharing resources, are sharing other concepts like Ubuntu from Africa and concepts from India and Hinduism. One of the questions, Joseph, is how the commissioning of evaluations would have to change to incorporate these questions. So Jordi mentioned the commissioning that comes from the OEC DAC criteria and the traditional ways of doing things. What would it look like to have people who commission evaluations, pay for them, mandate them, require them, or ask for them? What would they ask for that would incorporate this perspective? What might a commissioned evaluation look like?
Well, that's a very good, interesting question, but very difficult one. Yes. Well, sometimes, to me, well, it depends. Sometimes there are some kind of the evaluation purpose and approach actually conditions a lot, no, the space for this level of intervention. For example, when you do like more type of summative evaluations, in what you're trying to do is whether things have worked and provide evidence for that, you are more like in a closed system, and this allows for little room of flexibility. But in approaches such as developmental evaluations, maybe also informative evaluations, you could find the space for introducing some of the ideas. But my first just a suggestion is to try to test those ideas sometimes. And here, well, of course, we need words. We are humans and we communicate through words. Words are just symbols. But sometimes words are also limiting, especially when we talk about systemic concepts like this. So systems thinking goes beyond, as you saw in the Tao tree of knowledge, goes beyond explicit knowledge. So concepts like oneness are very difficult to grasp. That's why we need a direct experience with that. So just test, for example, I sense myself that sometimes Buddhist and Taoism are words that are not easy to access for certain people. Then I try to not call it Buddhism and Taoism, you know what I mean? But to bring the same essence and meaning. And so that could be a way, a shortcut to start entering and piloting some of the issues. So maybe finding a commission that already accepts, using all these methodologies right from the beginning would be very difficult, especially in kind of more bureaucratic formal settings. Maybe you could use it in more flexible and adaptive organizations, like maybe private foundations or small and medium-sized companies. But in agencies such as the United Nations, which is a major experience we have with Jordi, talking about this kind of stuff, it's not straightforward. So it's better, to have this kind of know-how and trying to introduce, pilot projects, concepts, identifying the right people, because there are people who are aligned at this level of understanding. So identifying those people, trying to test first the concept with them, I think that could be not only a good way to introduce all those concepts, but any concept that is just grounded, in the systemic thinking and approach, which very much has to do in a particular mental model.
Yeah. Let me add that one of the things to look for in commissioning is they're not going to ask specifically probably for the Taoist and Buddhist principles applied to evaluation, but we are starting to see commissions asking for systems approaches. And so part of my point was that when you're seeing the transition to systems, that's an opportunity to turn to these principles as part of the way of dealing with systems. Likewise, I found with the Food Systems Summit and with philanthropic foundations and others, there's a great deal of attention these days to diversity of perspectives. So when you hear that people are interested in incorporating diversity into evaluation, that's an opening to bring in other mental models and other kinds of concepts. When they are using the language of systems and complexity, it's up to us to make this transition into what that might mean. And that opens up some new possibilities. Naresh, your hand is up. Happy to hear from you. Tell us where you're coming from and make your comment or question.
Indeed. Thanks, Michael. I've been a long-time follower of the Blue Marble work, gone through the principles as well. I am currently based in Ottawa, Canada, and will move to the campus of the university, the Jindal Global University in India, where I'm now Vice Dean and Professor in the School of Government and Public Policy. I've worked a lot over the years in the UN system and so on, and worked on complexity theory, partnered with colleagues at Santa Fe. I've done a lot of evaluations as a consultant, and now in academia. The question I want to raise is, I mentioned in the chat, and I will follow up with Joseph, that we are designing a course on spirituality, sustainability, and policy. The question is that over the last 40 years of my rather long career, I've worked a lot on systems thinking in public policy arena, as well as evaluations. But like one question from a colleague was, in commissioning evaluations, if the commissioning agency or person doesn't ask you to use these techniques, your room for introducing them as an evaluator is quite limited. Similarly, in the work in public policy, among our practitioners, academics, and thinkers, we have done so much on systems thinking, whether for design or for research or for whatever else. But the world is still on the wrong trajectory. We are still heading to a place of crisis, climate change, It is not getting into the public policy process. That's the challenge we want to take. And I would like just some feedback at this stage, and we'll follow up later on, either from you, Michael, with all your years of experience, and from Joseph and Jordi as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the comment. Let me begin and then invite Joseph and Jordi to add in. One of the values of our professional associations is adopting principles and standards that help all of us make the case with policymakers and commissioners about how we ought to proceed. So that the International Development Evaluation Association, in its last face-to-face meeting in Prague in November, October of 2019, Jordi and Joseph were there, I was there. At the end of that conference, they adopted a manifesto of 10 items for the future of evaluation. And one of those items is that all evaluations should address sustainability, and that all evaluations should include a systems and complexity perspective. What that means then is that regardless of what a commissioner of evaluation may ask for, as professionals, you don't stand alone saying, I think that you ought to include sustainability, complexity, systems perspectives. Our profession, as a matter of professional ethics and standards, has said, given the climate crisis, given the pandemic, given the crises of social justice, that all evaluations should address these things. So we have a responsibility to educate the commissioners and to say, this isn't my personal opinion, that the profession has gone on record now, adopted standards that call for this. And that helps us not act alone, not be saying, this is just a matter of opinion, a matter of personal preference, but it is a matter of professional standards now. Those haven't been well communicated. You know, we all have an obligation. Joseph refers to that in the book. And so I think we've got a new volume of utilization-focused evaluation that will come out in November that very much pushes the obligation to bring social justice issues and sustainability issues and systems issues into all evaluations, because the profession has moved in that direction. Joseph, Jordi, do you want to add?
Yes, definitely. Well, I agree with that. I would add to, well, we have that responsibility, of course, as evaluators. And sometimes when you are you do evaluations, you scope, the evaluation. And I think that's a good space. There's a good room to identify, those policymakers that may be willing to not only adopt, a systems thinking methodology in particular, because this is in a further stage, but at least to frame that mental model in which, you later on can use mixed methods, and one of them could be, or some of them could be those systems methodologies, some of them that we just talk about, and many other. I was, the editor of my book is a systems thinker, Gerald Mitchley, and we had a discussion actually about this, because we are both, working with organizations, and he was also working on the public space addressing with hospitals in the UK. And actually this came up, and he said, well, actually, they want me to evaluate the very complex issue on how hospitals are coping with the post-pandemic, now that there's this COVID fatigue, after a year and a half, almost 2 years of COVID. And they just gave me all the guidelines they have, from traditionally evaluating these kind of interventions. So he organized actually a meeting with the executive committee of the hospital network in the UK. And he said, actually, if we want to do that, we need to apply these concepts first, which is about managing and evaluating complexity. And that was just a session of an hour and a half, and was very illustrative and mind-blowing. And that actually the executive committee, they actually didn't include those perspectives because they didn't know them. So it was a way to make them visible, and also to provide a space in which they could all agree, to add this into the main guidelines. So that allowed for him later and his team to develop and apply this kind of methodology. So, well, that may be that example. I just wanted to share, in case that can really help, maybe getting some insights. But I would be happy to discuss further, Naresh, if you like, of course, and share some ideas.
Definitely, with follow up. If I might, the big painful thing that I observe working now in India is that this country, which has such a rich heritage of philosophical and spiritual thought, Advaita Vedanta and so on, has very little to show in the way governance is done and the way public policy is made. Very little reflection. And that's a challenge I think we need to take up.
Definitely.
One of the big movements in evaluation and policy is decolonizing planning, decolonizing management, decolonizing evaluation. There's a lot to unlearn, a lot to undo.
Absolutely.
From the colonial period, everywhere in the world, including among the colonialists themselves. So that's part of the future agenda. Jordi?
Yes, I just wanted to add, because actually we have another couple of comments, one from Russell and one from Sarah Parkinson. Russell says that maybe to introduce these concepts, we would need to address the readiness for change of the commissioner. And then Sarah mentions a great point, which is that the challenge is that most traditional evaluations are aimed at the changes are aimed at the project level and not at the systems level. Now, on those, for the most skeptical, commissioners, how can you get in? And maybe, and this is just food for thought, okay, to share with us, maybe the connection is the unintended effects. Still, in traditional evaluation and in project evaluation, everybody would understand that what you have to assess, okay, effectiveness, whether the objectives have been achieved. And then in all definitions from all organizations across the UN and beyond, there is this, the fact that effectiveness does not only have to do with intended effects, but also with unplanned, unforeseen, unintended effects. And I think that that is the part that links every single thing we do with the system. I mean, Michael has put it before, is what do you do in your micro system that connects you to the macro system? There is always an impact of everything we do at a systemic level. So probably maybe a way to enter and incorporate all this vision, the systemic vision, is exactly that, is the work on unintended impacts and effects. And then you start incorporating questions there. And that would be a way to open that up. The other one, but that is for organizations or commissioners that are a bit more attuned, would be that everybody talks about transformation or sustainable transformation. Yeah, then the way is then it's easier. You say, okay, what does that mean? And to use maps. If we use maps when we do, as Josep said, when we scope for an evaluation and map all the potential questions, and in those mapping exercises and those scoping exercises, if we can show the commissioner that whatever they are doing, it's operating in a systems level, you know, maybe that map convinces them and they go and say, well, wow, I haven't thought about that, but yes, maybe what we do has connections with everybody. So I think that we do have those spaces, even with the skepticals, in order to open those windows of opportunity then to start incorporating that beyond and besides, Michael, what you said, which is like, you know, the professional standards, absolutely. But a way to apply it would be finding those small windows of opportunities with the skepticals.
Yeah, the impact criteria of that can also be expanded into the systems piece. And part of the context, one of the recommendations I made in the Food Systems Summit was that all this focus was on transforming agriculture systems and transforming food systems. And I noted that there was no discussion of transforming the international architecture and infrastructure that manages all of this. And that nobody, all these people in the room are all part of the international aid architecture that is very traditional, that is part of the problem, that is a barrier to innovation and change. And there was no discussion of transforming how the work is commissioned, how it's funded, how it's designed, how it's implemented, how it's managed, how it's evaluated. And so those systems are barriers to transforming food systems and ag systems and social justice systems and climate systems. But the people doing the work are looking at others and not looking at themselves. And you know, part of the message that Joseph had brought us is to look at our own arena, look at ourselves, look at our own organizations, look at our role, not just the change agents trying to change food, but the people who are managing all of that process. They have to be transformed too. There's a question here, Joseph, about evidence. What does this say about how to bring evidence into this when we're thinking about systems, but people are looking for some concrete evidence of what's going on? How do you approach evidence from the perspective that you've offered?
In which way? Because this can be a general question, no? Is there any way, you know, what kind of evidence?
So it's this, the question, the comment says systems thinking implies looking at things with a wide lens, which is very appropriate to examine today's complex issues, taking into account their interconnectedness. Others still, evaluations tend to remain closer to the evidence and take more focused lenses. Can we build evaluation systems in a way that we can connect a myriad of evidence to nurture systems level thinking and change?
Yes, well, I think I got it. And if not, please, the one who asked the question, you can open the mic and correct me. Well, actually, as you saw in the T-Qualia framework, right, the model, the one way that the systemic approach or systemic approaches can help us is in actually expanding our level of perception, and that brings us, you know, in being more attentive in collecting data and evidence, because anything that happens is data in that case. No? So when you put the lenses on systemic issues, you actually expand the level of and sources of collecting data or evidence. And then, of course, evidence itself without the context is just evidence or data. So systems thinking really help us and those approaches to contextualize the evidence and make sense of it. And when we include the multiple perspectives that we find in a system, which is always very difficult to grasp all of them, that also is a process in which we filter the evidence. It may help us in interpret what we are actually sensing and bringing to the table, and that fits into the decision-making process. So in a nutshell, evidence to me is much richer if you include those systems approaches into the process of perceiving, sensing, getting the evidence, and of course, later on making sense of them.
Well, thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Jordi, for being a part of this. We really appreciate the opportunity to hear from you. You can get the book at a discount, as Joseph said, and I'm going to bring Charmaine back in to tell you about some of the upcoming activities, how to join the Blue Marble Evaluation Network, some of what we have coming up, and then going to offer you a special opportunity to contribute to the global evaluation challenges of sustainability. So Charmaine, you can use what I brought up, or I can stop and you can share your own, whatever you prefer.
You're fine, this works.
All right.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to invite you, if you have not already, to join the Blue Marble Evaluation Network. We've got over 600 folks from more than 80 countries, and we're starting to think more intentionally about how to build this network into communities of practice with regional hubs, and would love to have you involved. So I'll put a link in the chat for that, and then you can go to the next slide. Wanted to just tell you about a few things that are coming up for us. So we have, here's some links. On October 5th, another webinar with Michael and Glenn Page. Will be doing more of an introduction to Blue Marble. So if you came into this and you felt like you needed a little to back up a little bit, they'll go into a little bit more of the background of Blue Marble evaluation, and Glenn will talk a little bit more about the global piece and the place-based work he's been doing. Then we've got a session on November 9th at the American Evaluation Association Conference. I saw Keiko was here. I think she's still here with Keiko and several other of our colleagues. And then on November 17th, as Michael said earlier, we've got the book launch for the 5th edition of Utilization Focused Evaluation, which features Blue Marble evaluation very prominently for the first time. So those are just some opportunities to continue to be engaged. And then if you want to go to the final slide, today, many of you may know, today is the kickoff for the Eval for Action Walk the Talk campaign. And so what we thought we might do is pause the recording after I finish here and invite anyone who would like to stay on and record a video for this campaign from the Blue Marble Evaluation Network that will just kind of introduce the network and how we're connected to walking the talk for influential evaluation. So I'll let Michael have a last word on this. We'll stop the recording, and then if you'd like to stay on, we'll start a new recording for that. Michael, any final words for this webinar?
Well, just a tremendous thanks. The book's an important contribution, an important achievement. Congratulations, Joseph. We'll continue to make people aware of it. Jordi, so glad to have you join us and help talk about your experience in applying these ideas. Lots of other resources in the chat. We'll be posting the results of this webinar on the Blue Marble Evaluation site. And with that, we'll stop the recording, but invite you to stay online and